Hi everyone, Leah here from EurekaCrystalBeads.com with another fun beading video for you. Before I get started, just a quick reminder to go check out the rest of our channel, and if you like what you see, hit the subscribe button and notification bell and you'll always know when we're posting new content. So today's video is going to be the basics of beginner bead embroidery. So we're just going over some of the basic techniques that allow you to put together this particular pendant, which let me tell you what it features. So right here is our sort of focal cabochon. And if you're not aware of what a cabochon is, it's a flat back stone. It could be a stone, it could be glass, it could be lucite, but it's usually flat, semi-flat or domed on top, and then it's flat underneath. So that way you can glue it down to a surface. We have a beautiful carved German glass cabochon that has a beautiful iris iridescent finish to it. They're stunning. And then here I've used a 10mm Swarovski crystal pearl cabochon. So it is not drilled. It is actually flat on the underside. And then we have some various seed beads. So to make this particular design, I'm going to be utilizing a size 11 Miyuki Delica. I have a couple of colors of a size 11 seed bead. And I have a couple of colors of a size 15 seed bead. One of them happens to be Toho, one of them happens to be Miyuki, so I almost drop them everywhere. The final product looks like this, and as you can see, we have ultra-suede as our backings. I do have these already glued down, but I'm going to go over all that entails. So let's get started. So this is the glue that we're going to be using to adhere the cabochons to our ultra-suede. This is called E6000. We do carry it in a few different sizes. This happens to be the smallest tube. It's a nice, relatively inexpensive glue. Works very well for this. And what I've gone ahead and done is glued my cabochons down, but we're going to insert some pictures that show you exactly how much glue I really needed to get them down. So you can take a look at those little still shots we're going to plug in here. But I've now allowed this, about maybe 45 minutes to an hour to dry. It's okay if it's not 100% completely dry, as long as you support the stone against the ultra-suede as you work on it. But this actually has been going for probably about an hour or so, so it's pretty on there. As far as a needle and thread, I'm working with 6-pound Fireline, and I'm working with a size 10 needle. If you have a preference to work with a thinner needle, you certainly can, but wonderfully, this project doesn't have to have a smaller needle. You can use a size 10, and it's a little bit easier to thread, so yay. All right, so I'm going to start by making a knot at the very end of my Fireline here, and I'm going to tie 2 knots, one on top of the other, so this way they create a knot that's a little bit bigger. And this is what's going to keep our Fireline from popping up through the back of the ultra-suede. We're going to start with a little peyote bezel around our Swarovski pearl cabochon. Now, when you do bead embroidery and you do cabbing with cabochons, you don't always have to do a bezel that holds them together. As long as they're glued down properly with the right amount of the proper adhesive, you don't have to do a bezel. So on this bottom one, there will not be a bezel needed to hold it down. We'll simply be doing some beading around it. But I do think it's a lovely contrast to have something bezeled on the piece. So we're going to learn how to do it both ways. So for our peyote bezel here, I'm just going to come up right next to the pearl here. Now, as you can see, that's a little bit far away. So there's going to be a lot of instances here where you're having to poke up through and then back out and re-poke to make sure you get just the right spot here. Now, in this case, I'm actually, I think, a little bit too close to the stone. See how my needle has to angle a little bit? What that's going to do is it's going to start to pull my first ring of beads underneath the stone a little bit, and I'm not really looking for that to happen. So I'm going to try one more time, and if you even have to turn it over and look from the back, that's fine too. And I'm going to just move it over a hair. It's still a little bit too much. There we go. I think that's just about perfect. It's right next to the stone. The needle is able to stick straight up. That's where we're going to get started. Now, the basic technique that's going to start this off is going to be your basic as it gets bead embroidery. For this, because I know I'm going to be making this to a bezel, I am going to do this with a Delica. Now, when we lay these beads down, because this is going to be a little peyote bezel, it's important that we lay them down in even numbers because we want to make sure that the total number ends up being even. And I'll show you how to troubleshoot that in a few minutes in the event that the perfect amount ends up being an odd number. I'll show you how to troubleshoot that. So I'm going to start off by picking up 4 Delicas. I'm going to bring them all the way down to my pearl. Like this. And I'm just going to lay them right around the pearl. Just kind of hold my finger there. And right where that last delicate ends is where I want to stick my needle back down my ultra-suede. And as you're going, no matter how long your glue has taken to dry, I always like to keep supporting the stone against the ultra-suede as well. So we pull it down. That's what we get. Now we want to basically do like a back stitch. So we want to come back up through the ultra-suede in between that group of 4 beads. So after bead 2 and before bead 3. It gets easier to do this just by sort of feeling and knowing where to poke up. But if you're unsure, it's basically going to be halfway between the knot and where your thread is. So basically about eyeball halfway, and that's basically where we're going to want to come up. Again, might take a couple of tries. It even still does for me sometimes. Look at that. I got that pretty good right there. It's right in between them. Pull this all the way down. And then we can go back through the last 2 beads, like this. So what we end up with is a chunk of beads, in this case 4, that is tacked down to the ultra-suede at the beginning, the middle, and the end. That's what we want. So now we're just going to repeat that. We're going to pick up another 4 delicas. Again, because I want this to be even, I'm always going to pick up an even number as I go along. That way I'm always aware at the end whether I still have an even number or whether I have an odd number, and we don't want an odd number. So again, I brought my beads down. You can see this is where they are. Just bring them all the way down, push them up against the first 4 that are there. Like that. And then we're going to head right down past that last delica. Just like that. Yep, there we go. Playing with our focus here. There we go. Pulls them down. Now again, we want to head up halfway. Oops, I got my little tail caught in there. That's all right. Halfway between that last stitch and where we're coming up. So you can kind of just eyeball right in the middle, or you can sort of practice over time and you can get a little bit better at coming up just by feel, and you'll know roughly halfway. You can see that we're about halfway in between. So now we can go through the last 2 again. So this next group of 4 is tacked down at the beginning, the middle, and the end. Just like that. You start to see is just some basic stitches along the back. All of this will end up getting covered. You won't see any of this stitching, so you can feel free to be as messy as you like. This will end up getting glued and backed onto another layer of ultra-suede, and that will cover all of that. So I'm just going to take a quick cut away from the camera, and I'm going to get almost all the way around, and then I'll show you how you troubleshoot if you don't have the exact even amount that you need to go around the stone. Okay, so I've made it almost all the way around. I have enough space left where I believe is going to be the exact even number I need, which is the amount of 4. Let's see, let's confirm that. Yeah, this worked out pretty well. Exactly 4 fit right in there. Now, in the event that whatever cab you're going around, say the exact perfect amount left was 3. Well, we can't end with 3 if we're going to be doing a peyote bezel. If we were just going around the stone simply, whatever amount you end up with is fine. But if the intent is to do a peyote bezel, we need to have an even number. So if the perfect amount left was 3, or whatever that odd number is, go with 1 less. Always bump down to the even number below it. It's easier for us to make up for a little bit of wiggle room by tightening it up slightly by going through it. That always is going to be easier and look better than trying to jam in 1 extra bead. So if the perfect number was 3, to jam in a 4th. So always go lower by 1. But in this case, 4 ends up being pretty perfect. So I'm going to go down through go down right next to the very first bead, or right before it. Okay. Try to get it right going through that same stitch if you can, that had where you first started. Pulls it right in, and then we're going to back stitch it into place. So go up halfway through. There we go. Halfway through. So that way we can get the final 2 of that 4 tacked down. Just like that. So we go through those 2, but then we're going to keep going and we're just going to circle around through this whole ring of beads just to smooth it out nicely. So whether you had to fudge with the numbers a little bit and you have one less than the ideal amount to get that even number, or even if you had the perfect number to make an even count like I did here, I still like to do this just because I find it makes them sit a little bit nicer. And one of the things that you're going to want to make sure that you don't let happen is you don't want to let your beads creep underneath that curve of your cab. Really keep them, I like to really press my finger up here and keep them right along the outside of the stone. So now we're going to start the peyote bezel, and this is a really simple one. It's just going to take a row of delicas and then a row of 15s, and that's it. It's just going to be something very nice and simple. So if you've never done a peyote bezel before, I'm going to show you the basics of that here. So I'm coming out of, say, bead 1. I'm picking up a delica. I'm hopping over the next delica and going into bead 3. Just like that. Pull this all the way down. And your beads, depending on the tightness around here at first, may want to try to squish right into that ring. Just encourage it to sit right on top of the bead that it skipped over, even if it's got to sit out to the side. Eventually those 15s are going to pull it all up onto the stone, but even if it just has to sit out to the side for now, that's fine. Okay, and then we do the same thing again. We pick up another bead, another delica. Recognize the one that you're coming out of, skip over the next one, and go into the one after that. Okay, again, we're going to pull this down. Just use a medium amount of tension here, because if you pull everything too tightly, those beads that we're adding are just going to want to squish right into that ring. And again, like I said before, we want to keep them, encourage them to sit right on the outside there. Just like that. All right, so I'm going to keep going all the way around, and I'll see you back here in a minute for our step up and getting to the next row. Okay, so I just have now my last delica here on my needle. So just like with any even count peyote bezel, we're going to have what's called a step up. So that is a extra little bead that we're going to go through that's going to finish up this round and set us up to start the next round. So all we have to do is go through the bead in our ring that we normally would be going through, so that every other bead, you can see this, you can see the one I'm coming out of. I skipped over the next one and I'm going into the one after that. And then the step up is that I'm going to angle my needle up and also go through the very first bead I added when I started the actual peyote. It's the first bead I added from this row that I'm finishing. And that's what's going to pull this last bead down. So now we're ready to do a row with the 15s. And the 15s are going to start to pull everything up onto the. And so we're just going to continue with the peyote, just as normal. Pick up another bead. In this case, it happens to be a different size bead, but it's the same process. And the peyote is going to be a little easier now because all we have to do is go through the ones that are popped up. And that makes it a lot easier to know where you have to go. And you can see as I pull this down, it starts to pull the beads up close to the wall of the cabochon. So I'll show you another one. I picked up my 15. I'm going through the next popped up delica. Just like that. And as I pull it down, it pulls into place and it helps to pull those beads up onto the wall of the cabochon. So I'm going to keep going around and I'll be back in a minute. Okay, I went all the way around with my 15s, as you can see, and I picked a nice green because this particular cab, as you can see, when you see it from an angle, it goes very bluey green. So I wanted to pull in both those pinky gold colors and bluey green colors. And so where I left off is I just did my step up. So my step up again was, let me loosen this up so I can show you. I picked up my final 15. I went through the delica I needed to go through, and then the 15 after it, which is where you can see my thread coming out of now, because that was the first 15 of the row I'm just completing. That's my step up. And you want to give this a nice little tug, and it starts to pull that bezel right over our pearl. To start the next part, which is going to be going around my stone here, I always like to start by going around all of my cabs in some way. For me, that just sort of starts the layout of the rest of the design I want to do. I'm just going to travel down my bezel here, just diagonally down the peyote. You can see what I'm doing here, just heading down diagonally because my goal is to pop through the ultra-suede to come out the bottom. Go through one more delicate and then straight through to the back of my ultra-suede. Just like that. And now I'm going to pop up right next to my stone, my bigger stone, my bigger cab here, my carved German glass cab. Come up right next to it. Might take a couple tries to pop through in just the right spot, and this is perfect. I'm coming up right next to the stone. I'm not sort of undercutting it, and I'm not far away from it either. Right in the perfect place. And this is going to be even easier than this because we're not going to be doing a bezel in this case. We're simply going to be doing that first row of beads going around like we did here. So for that, I'm going to use one of my size 11 seed beads. I think I'm going to start with this sort of lovely matte gold color here. And we'll link you below to all the things that I've used as well. So just like before, I'm going to be picking up an even number of beads. Now this cab's a little larger, so I'm going to pick up 6 at a time, and I'll be tacking it every 3. So I'll backstitch in between the first 3 and the second 3. So we're going to bring this all the way down. Make sure it's all the way to the same exact spot where your thread is coming out. Lay this gently around your cab and just kind of hold it there with your finger. Might be a little tricky. Just like that. And then go straight down after that last bead. All right, so we just bring this right down like that. We're going to come up halfway. Again, sometimes it takes a couple tries to get it to come up in the right spot. That's totally normal. So just like this, halfway through, 3 and 3. And then you go through your last 3. Just like that. Pull it all the way through, and you're going to repeat. You're going to go pick up 6 at a time, going all the way around. And when you get to the beginning again, where you started, and remember, it's important that it's always an even number. So again, if the perfect amount left is perfect for 3, bump down to 2. If it's perfect for 5, bump down to 4. But hopefully it's an even number. It just makes things a little easier. So I'll be back in a minute with that part completed. Okay, so I made it all the way around, and in this case I actually didn't need to worry too much about whether it was an even or odd number, because I was just going to do a simple line around. But it's never a bad thing to keep it in the back of your head, because in the event that you change your mind and you do want to do a bezel, you'll have that even number set up for you. So I did finish this off, and I went down through, similar exactly how I did this actually, and I just went down through my ultra-suede and back up so I can start a nice fresh clean row. And now I'm going to do a row going around with 15s. And about here, I'm going to start to speckle in the other color of 15. So I have 2 different greens here. I have sort of a darker green that's shiny, and I have a little bit more of a bluey green that's matte. So I'll start to speckle in the shiny one after a bit. Similar to right here, you can see I started to speckle in the gold one in this row right there. There's no rhyme or reason to it. You can use math as much as you like, or you can just eyeball it. It's up to you. So all I'm going to do is start to pick up my 6 beads at a time, which is generally the amount I like to pick up each time I do a little chunk of bead embroidery. And then it's tacked down every 3 beads, which I think is reasonable. Just lay it down on the outside or wherever you want it. Again, you can stray from this as much as you'd like. We pull all the way through. Pop it over, look at it on the outside, on the underside, if it helps. You'll get pretty good at eyeballing, or sort of just going by feel, where you need to pop up to go through the final 3, or the final half of whatever that number is that you put up. You go through the final 3, and now that 6 is tacked down at the beginning, middle, and end, just like that. And I'm going to keep going around doing 6 at a time. And again, I'll start to speckle in that other size 15 here as I go. So I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so I've made it all the way around, or almost all the way around. As you can see, I've started to speckle in some of those shinier green 15s, because as I go, this side is going to be a bit more heavy into that green, and it's going to start to go a little bit more bluey pink on this side. Now, as far as what to do here, so we basically are unable to continue that line, and we want to start going around our cab. So the easiest way that I find to take a sort of a sharp corner like this is, after I've tacked down the final half of that little strip of beads that I put on. So right now I'm basically at the part where I would pick up more beads if I was just continuing in a straight or a curved line. I'm going to go straight down through my ultra-suede, and then come right back up in the place that I want to start. Right there. Okay. So I'm going to pick up my next little section of beads. And I just kind of eyeballed, starting to sprinkle in that other color. And now this one can just start there. So all I'm going to do is continue on with the same technique that I've been doing. Again, I'm going to have more of that shinier dark green sprinkled in and less of that matte bluey green as I go around. But I'm just going to keep going around, and I'm going to meet back at that side there. Okay, so I finished going around the top of our pearl cab here, and by the time I got to over here, I was using nothing but that shiny green. And I ended that area by going straight down through my ultra suede and then up my ultra suede right where I wanted my next line to start, which for me was this pink line here. Because now I'm going to start to go around here with the pink. And then once I get about here, I'm going to start to repeat the kind of thing that's going on here, using the 2 different 15s and speckling in a bit more of that dark green as well, because I want to have that sort of like bluey pink over here to deeper goldish green over here. So I'm just going to keep going around, sort of mimicking what I have here, just eyeballing it as I go and starting to sprinkle in both of those colors a bit more. And then as I get up here, I want to keep having much more of the shiny green versus the matte green. So I'll be back in a minute. All right, so I finished going around here, and now what I have to do is start to follow this line going up here. But before I do that, I'm going to show you how you easily add on thread. And one of the things I love about bead embroidery is that it tends to go pretty fast because you're not spending all of your time pulling huge amounts of thread, because there's no need to work with huge amounts of thread because it's very easy to add on new thread to your project. So when I finished this row, I went down and then I back stitched the last few, and then I went back down again. So now I'm coming out from underneath my ultra suede. All I'm going to do to end this thread off is I'm going to catch myself underneath the closest stitch of thread to where I am. So it's about there. Pull all the way, almost all the way through. My little tail is caught in there. And go through the little loop that's formed. That's going to tie a little knot. I'm going to do that again. Go underneath the stitch of thread, pull through, you get this little loop right here, go through your loop, ties a knot. Now I can trim this off. I'm not going to trim it super close to the knot. I'll leave a little bit of an edge there. And all of this, remember, is not only going to be backed on another piece of ultra suede, it's also going to have glue here as well. So that's also going to hold all of this there. And now we're going to start off a new thread the same exact way as we did in the beginning, with another piece of easy to manage length fire line, the little double knot at the end, come up from the bottom wherever you want to keep going, and that's it. All right, so I've gone ahead and threaded my needle. I have my little double knot there at the very end. I'm sticking my needle up through my ultra suede in the exact spot that I want to continue along with my bead embroidery. If you pull this all the way through, your fire line now doesn't pop up. And I'm going to continue on. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to start to continue using that shiny green, which is this one here. And I'm going to start to speckle in some of my Delica color to further get that peachy color into there. You can see that this is where we are. Let me stick my needle in here just so you can see exactly which row we're in. This is the row we're working on right here, right where my needle's popping in. So you can see that gold is the equivalent of that shiny green. And then you can see that sort of seafoamy green delica. That's the peachy one that we're going to be working with now. We're going to start to speckle that in so it starts to pull that color in a little bit more here. And we'll also end up using that later in the bale as well. So that's what I'm going to continue to do. I'll be back in a minute. Okay, I've continued with that next layer up and around the cab, that pearl cab. And now I want to start another area, but not right where I am. So I've gone and back stitched those last few beads. I'm now going to go back down through my ultra suede so I can pop up wherever I'd like. And what I want to do is another layer in this area, but not all the way around. I want to start about here, about a third of the way up on either side. So I'm just going to go ahead and pop up right where I want that to start, right there. And I'm going to go ahead and do another layer, and so you can see as I spill my beads everywhere, folks. So this layer here, going along the top, I want to be all delicas, most specifically at the very top here, because it's the delicas that we're going to work the delica bale off of. So it doesn't have to be entirely delicas over here, but at least for this top portion of this final row that we're going to be doing here, we want this section here at least to be all delicas. So I'm going to go and bead embroider a ring from here to about the same point on the other side, and I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so I did that little mini row up here where I left some space here and here, because what I want to start to do is another little bead embroidery technique, another little embellish technique to fill in this little area. So right now it's sort of looking a little bit snowman-like, and I want to get away from that. I want it to start to have the outer shape of just overall like a pear. Not so much, not so cut in. I want to make the outer edging that we do a little bit easier. So I'm going to show you a little way that you can sort of fill in little areas very gradually. And it's very much like painting with beads. It's a lot of fun. So all you have to do is come up in the exact spot that you want to start. So I just finished off that last little bit there. So I'm going to go down through my ultra suede. And I like to start this little part coming right up from where those two areas sort of come in together. And all you do is pick up a single bead and go right back down. You start to dot in little beads. So I'm going to pick up one of these. Oop, I got to come back up first. Come back up. I'm going to pick up a little bead and go right back down. And you can just very slowly and gradually fill in little areas with beads. And in abundance, it really does look adorable. So this is that little area here and here. You can see it just nicely fills that area in. You can do some color blending there as well, that like we've been doing all along here and over here. And you're going to start to just fill that area in just so that it doesn't cut in as much. So that way our outer shape, when we trim our ultra suede, our outer shape can be a little bit more straight here. And so overall we have more of a pear. So I'm going to fill a little bit more of that in, and I will be back to show you what that looks like in a minute. All right, as you can see, I have filled in that little area there. Little bits of beads. That's a nice way for you to just do some really subtle work. And now it'll allow us, when we end up trimming this, to kind of cut straight down as opposed to having to cut inward and then back out. So that's what I wanted to do, was create a little bit of a straighter edge overall for the piece. And now what I'm going to do is I am underneath my ultra suede here. I'm just going to pop up right over here. And I'm going to do the same thing, only I'll be using a bit more of the pinky gold colors over here to continue on with that sort of color transition. But it's going to take on the same shape as over here. I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so I finished sort of stippling in those little areas here, and in abundance, they actually create beautiful texture. I've seen bead embroidery actually that's utilized quite a bit of this technique, and it really has such a stunning look. But it's also, like I said, a great way to fill in small areas where you just want a little bit of a different shape. Or I even did a couple right down in here because I could still see a little bit of my ultra suede from the front, which I don't mind entirely. It's one of the reasons why I love that ultra suede comes in so many colors, because I can really coordinate through, and it's okay if some of it shows through. I think that adds to the interest. But there was a little bit more than I'd like showing in some spots where it essentially looked like holes that needed beadwork to fill them up. So I did stipple in a couple right there, which again is another great use for that particular technique. So at this point, what we're going to do is we get to trim this now, and the ultra-suede trims very easily. We're going to trim around, but you don't want to cut right next to your beads because we don't want to risk cutting those stitches. You want to leave about a bead's width worth of ultra-suede around it. So I'll give you a close-up of that. You can see it's about a 15's worth of width, still hanging off the edge. So that's what I'm going to do all the way around. And now we're going to be doing a little more gluing. But before we glue, I did make sure that my fire line is coming up from the bottom of my ultra-suede, and I'm coming out of some of the delicas that are right along this top row, because once we glue this onto our backing, I'm going to show you how we stitch the 2 layers together, and then finally it'll be our bail. So I want to have my thread already set up to be in that spot. So as far as the gluing, we have our E6000 here. And as far as the consistency of E6000, it's sort of like rubber cement in a way. And by that, I mean, if you've ever worked with rubber cement and you get a little on your hands or a little on a surface, you can just sort of rub it and you can actually just get it to come right off. This isn't like an epoxy glue where once it's, if you accidentally get a little bit on your cab, you're stuck. It's there, it's a blemish on your piece. You can actually just sort of like pick it right off and it ends up being a little rubbery. So don't panic if things get a little bit messy. So the main concern here is that we want to make sure that we have a nice even amount of coverage, but you don't want to go too gloppy. There just isn't really a need. Remember, we're going to have stitching going all the way around that's going to hold these 2 layers together. So we really just need a nice light layer here. All right, so that's about the amount that I'm going to work with here. And you can use a toothpick or a paper clip or popsicle stick, anything you want to just spread it out here. And that's it. We're just going to gently spread it out. As you can see, it's a little gloopy, but you can see you get a nice thin layer. This is what you want to see right there, like a nice thin layer. All right, so I've gone ahead and stuck this to my piece of ultra-suede here, and all we have to do is trim around it. And you want to make sure as you trim that you don't undercut by having your scissors or clippers tilted this way, or overcut by having it tilted this way. Keep them very, very straight and cut right along the outside. Remember, you can always cut off more, so if you're not sure, cut off a little bit at a time, but we're essentially going to look to mimic that shape, so that way our 2 layers are the same size. And of course, make sure that you don't cut off your fire line here. Okay, so we've gone ahead and trimmed off our ultra-suede, and now what we're going to do is a beaded whip stitch edging that's going to go all the way around. And then when we get back to right up top here, we're going to be all set up in the exact spot to do our bail. So as far as the beads you can use from the outside, I actually changed the beads that I did on the outside to match with the beads that were near it on the front of the piece. So example, to pick up more of this purple size 11, that's the one I used here. To pick up more of the teal and the seafoamy color, that's what I used over here. So it's up to you. You can use a single color to frame the whole piece, or you can use the colors depending on how it's interacting with the colors on the front. It's up to you. I think either one is a lovely option. You can certainly play around with it, but that's what we're going to do. So the easiest way to do our whip stitching is not trying to fit too many stitches in too small a space. The biggest mistake I see people make with the whip stitching is they try to get so many tiny little stitches, and the problem is that the more of a beginner you are at doing this, and the less perfect your stitches are, which is naturally going to be the case if you've never done this before, the more obvious they are if they're too close together. If they're spaced out a little bit more, if that spacing isn't perfect, it's less obvious. So don't try to cram too much into a small space. All you're going to do, see, I'm going to use one of my delicas here. All you're going to do is pick up your bead and imagine that your thread is going right back, but then angle it just a little bit. And that's how we're going to catch our 2 layers together and come up through both layers, but on the outside of your beads. Let me get in the focus there. There we go. And as you pull the stitch down, you can sort of use your fingertips here, your thumb and your forefinger, to guide that bead into place so it sits basically right on that seam where the two come together. Just like that. And you want to encourage all of the subsequent beads to sort of sit the same exact way. So let me show you that again. We pick up our bead. You can look on the back if you want to sort of check your spacing as you go. And this next stitch and how far away it is from the first stitch should really sort of set the precedent for the spacing in between all our stitches. So I'll give you an idea of what I like to see. Again, I think it's best to not have them too close together. So I'm going to pull through them. Again, I'm coming up through both layers, but on the outside of the beadwork. I pinch my fingers here so that way I can guide that bead down into place to hopefully sit at the same little angle as the first delica and in the same little spot, which is right on top of where the two bits are coming together. There we go. See how they sort of sit at the same little angle? Let me try to get that to focus. That's what we want to see. So to pick up another one, I find when I do whip stitching, I usually start always looking at the back. So I'll turn it to the back again so I can get that spacing. I can eyeball that same spacing. And then as I go to push through, I turn it to the front so that way I can make sure that I'm going through both layers and on the outside of that last bead embroidered line of beads. Again, I go to pull through, I move my fingers up so I can guide that delica down and hopefully have it sit in the same angle, which it more or less is. And again, you want to see nice, even spacing. Nice, even spacing. You may even want to practice this. I mean, after taking all of the time to make this beautiful piece, to me, messy stitching can sort of really detract from that. So you may even want to take some scraps of ultra-suede and practice doing some whip stitching together until you really master it. So that way, when you're actually finishing off a piece that you've spent a lot of time on, you have that part a little bit more under your belt. So again, I'm going to pick up one more. I'm going to turn it to the back first. So that way I can get my correct needle placement, which will be hopefully equidistant for all the other ones. Then I turn it towards the front so I can watch the tip of my needle pop through both layers and on the outside of my beading. And I guide that bead down. And you can see the beads do set at a little bit of an angle because I'm making my stitches at a little bit of an angle. And that's what you're going to do. Now, something to keep in mind is that this is going to be the first of a group of bead embroidery projects. We're going to be bringing you other projects with bead embroidery, utilizing other pieces, other items. We're going to have a lot of fun things planned for other elements that you can incorporate. There are other ways that you can finish off your stitching. There's other ways of bead embroidery that bead over and cover that stitching. We're going to go over more of those things in future projects. So you're definitely going to want to keep returning back and subscribe to the channel to catch more of those projects. This is really just the most basic of basic bead embroidery projects to get you started in the event that you've never done it before. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep going around with my whip stitching, and I will see you back up here once I'm at the top to finish us off with the bail. All right, so my whip stitching is done. As you can see, I sort of blended the colors. I went from that peachy delica down to that deeper pink 11. I started to get in some of the green here until I was at mostly green, and then back up to the peachy delicas. Just to further kind of go with that color scheme of the whole peachy pink over here and then a bit more greenish over here. And this is what it looks like from the back. You want to see nice even stitches. Again, sometimes less is more. It's not like we need to stitch, you know, every little bit to hold it all together. Just a nice regular amount of stitches, evenly spaced, is going to be sufficient without too much crowding. So that's what we have. So now the last part is to do our fun little simple bail, which as you can see utilizes delicas and then some 15s to edge it. So we're just going to be doing an easy little square stitch bail with a little picoed edging. You can make the bail as big or as small as you need to, depending on what you might want to do for a cord. You could even forego doing a bail altogether and simply have beaded loops off to the side. If there's something specific you wanted to attach it to, it's totally up to you. But in this case, I'll show you what to do here. So I maneuvered myself, so I'm coming out of that top row of delicas, slightly off center, about a bead or two off center, because the two that I'm going to use next will sort of help to center it. So we have a little strip that we're going to make coming out. So I'm going to pick up two delicas, and I'm going to square stitch back into 2 in the bail, and I'll give you a close-up once I can get my needle in there. So you can see the one that I'm coming out of, and then I sort of went 2 back, and that's what I went through. And it's going to pull these so they sit right on top of those 2. And then we go through those 2 new delicas. So we're coming out of the little tip of this little strip that we're creating. Now I pick up 2 new delicas. You want to keep this very tight. You can circle back through everything double if you have to in order to keep it tight if you have a harder time with tension. So now I'm going to circle back around through the 2 that I just added. So my needle and my thread are coming out of the same spot. And this is going to go just like that. And it pulls them down. And now we flip it. If you find it most comfortable to do. I always like to work with my needle pointing away from me, so I like to keep flipping. I give it a nice good tug and go through the two new ones. And again, if you have a harder time keeping it tight, you can go through everything over again, circle through everything double, and that'll tighten it up for you. Again, pick up 2, loop back around through the 2 you're coming out of, like that. And they will go ahead and sit right on top. And then you go through the 2 new ones. And you can see that we start to create this little strip coming off. So I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to make that a little bit longer, and I'll be back here in a second. All right, I have my little strip here. So not including the 2 delicas in that row that I was coming out of, I did 9 additional little pairs of beads. So now we're just going to circle back through the 2 that were in that beaded row. So in that bead embroidered row. So if I'm coming out on this side, that's the side I'm going to start with when I go into those 2 below. Just like that. Make sure it flips back the right way. It pulls it down, and we're going to circle back through the last pair that we added. It looks like this, just so we can now pull it down nice and tight. And then you're going to circle through that whole thing again, those 4 beads, those 2 pairs that we just did, just to keep things nice and tight and secure. And in an ideal world, I would have had a white fire line for this part here because it's such a light delica. But for the sake of the video, it's always easier for me to use dark fire lines so you guys can see it easier. And I'll also be covering it up with a little peyote edging anyway, so that will help. All right, so now is our nice little fun peyote edging. If you've ever done picos before, they're a great little embellishment technique. So all I'm going to do is utilize one of my colors of my 15s. In the original sample here, I did gold on the outside. I'm going to use the shinier of the 2 15s, and all I'm going to do is pick up 3, my 15s here, and I'm coming out of one delica there, and I'm going to go in and out of the next delica right above it. Just like that. Sometimes you have to pop it into place just a little bit so it sits in that nice little picot triangle. Just like this, and now I'm going to go out the next delica. All right, so I was coming out of delica 1, I picked up my 3 beads, I went into delica 2, out delica 3, and that's where I am now. And so now I can pick up another 3 of my 15s and go into delica 4. Just like that. All right, so I'm going to continue around with my little peyote edging, and then I'll go across and I'll do it on the other side as well, and I'll be back in a second. All right, so I finished up my little bail there. Again, that little square stitch bail, little fun picot edging. Again, play with these colors however you like. You know, when you have sort of beautiful colors put together for you, there's sort of no right or wrong way, and you're gonna get something gorgeous no matter what. So if you have different color decisions you would make, that's totally fine, go for it. So I have my little bail there, which you could slip anything through that you'd like. And all I did once I finished doing my little picot edging is I worked my way into that outer edge of bead embroidery where I can just work on knotting out my thread, doing my half hitch knots, going underneath my thread, through my loop, go through some more beads, underneath my thread, through my loop. And I'll probably do another 3 or 4 of those just for safety. But that is all she wrote, folks. That is a lovely little bead embroidered pendant. Again, this is, like I said, as basic as it gets. This is to get you started, get you used to this, get you comfortable. Watch for more videos in the future that are going to go over more advanced techniques for bead embroidery. All sorts of fun things are in the works. So yeah, that wraps it up. Thanks for watching. Make sure to visit us on over at eurekacrystalbeads.com for everything I used in this video, and hopefully we can satisfy all of your beading and jewelry needs. Bye.